is the indie game guy the way to go? Do you ever wish you were part of a big production making one of these big blockbuster games?
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. Definitely indie. There's not even a question. I don't know. For me, like I said, I always wanted to make games. I always wanted to create my own games. So in being indie is probably the only way to do that these days with full creative freedom. I always wanted to make games, so it was kind of in a straight path for me. It was so what I did is I went to DigiPen, which is this college that focuses on game programming, and that was like for programming mostly. But there's also artists and things like that.
So even when you were like a little kid, you were like one of those kids who wanted to make games when you grew up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, mostly, sure. Like I knew it was going to be creative and like designing stuff, and it was probably going to be video games because I was really into video games my whole life. So it was kind of also very serendipitous. Like it just kind of happened. I was there and. Yeah, I liked it. I liked it because the people were very into games and they were very happy to be there and to be making games all the time and just talk about games. Everybody was about games, so that was good. And also I think the way they taught programming there was always focused on the applications, in this case games, and it was good because you always knew why you were learning something or how it was going to be used in your cool video game. So that was cool.
Going from being like a little kid who would like to make them and just makes manuals to actually learning how they're made for real, was it what you expected, or is it so gradual you don't notice, or is it like, oh gosh, I never thought it would be like this?
That's a good question. Well, I guess I had done a little bit of programming before, like making web pages and things like that. But, I've never really... It wasn't something that I asked myself. It was just like, okay, well, I'm going to be making games, and that's how it's going to be. I felt, for me personally, like programming was never very difficult somehow. So it was just like, I went into it, and I could program and I could make games, and that's it. It wasn't something like, oh my god, this is much harder than I thought it would be, or something like that. It was just happened.
What was the first game you made?
Let's see. I think well, there as a team we did a very simple text-based game, which is an adventure game, where it's like, you're in this room, where do you want to go, north, south, whatever. And I remember because it was hilarious because it was so horribly programmed. Like, I don't know how you can like mess something up that is that simple, but yet we managed. It was pretty beautiful. Yeah, that's it. It was, I don't know, it was simple. We just had, you could fight people. There was like combat every once in a while.
When you always hear when people are at medical school and stuff like that, after a while they begin to realise what they want to specialise in, what direction they want to go when they become a doctor.
Right.
Is it like that when you're becoming a gaming programmer?
Yeah, definitely.
What did you start feeling was a direction for you?
Well, I think for games, there's graphics, there's AI, there's physics, there's tools, there's, I guess, sound, or there's gameplay, which is more general, just, and so I think I always liked graphics, and and also liked game design, right? So for me, it was about trying to combine those two, I guess. But DigiPen is also very much about graphics, so it worked out somehow because that was my favorite thing. So
You graduated?
Yes. Yeah. And then I wanted to learn more hardcore math, so I decided to apply to grad school, and I went to Brown, and there I just spent some time taking classes that were fun, basically, because I already knew how to make games at that point. It was just, well, how can I get really good at some of the math stuff and some of the graphics and things like that, so that I can innovate in the field and not just be someone who copies what everybody else is doing all the time.
So you went to study math solely because you wanted to make better games, like the math study was with that intent?
Yeah, definitely.
What kind of math do you study? Like, what kind of math do you seek out when you want to use it for games? Like, what were you looking for?
Well, in one way, I wasn't looking for anything that was the point, right? It was just me trying to see what exists, what is cool. Like, not even, try to find things that are not applied to games yet and see if they could be applied and things like that. But let's see. I did, I ended up specializing in solid mechanics. So basically deformable solids and the theory of how something deforms under forces, stress, and so just the math of how you define that was very interesting. For some reason, I enjoyed that. It was just there's some kinds of math that I really enjoyed.
Did you straight away, or did it take a while? At what point did you think this was a good decision? I am getting something out of this for my game aspirations, or did that never happen? Like, was it immediate? Was it how did
yeah. No, I think it was just continuous, as in, I'm learning all this math. It's cool. Like, it's just, I wanted to apply it to something, and that's what I was looking for through grad school, is how am I going to apply this? And so I guess, the solid mechanics was sort of me going deep in that direction and trying to learn about something that I think could be applied, that I thought could be applied to games and hadn't been that applied to games. In computer science, like, high dimensional space is just part of the background. People don't even, that doesn't faze them at all, right? I mean, it's slightly different. Like, it's not a physical space, it's just a data space, right? Like, you have points floating in this high dimensional space, and they don't really, there's no real structure. But
for someone like me, or the man in the street, they're going to say, like, why does a computer need extra dimensions? Like, why in computer science are extra dimensions existing at all? Because computers just exist in our reality, and even games are like 3D games.
Yeah.
Why does a computer scientist use these higher dimensions at all?
Well, one example is like an image. That was like super big when I was there. An image, every pixel is a color, and the color is represented with usually 3 numbers. And so that's like 3 dimensions, but you have millions of pixels on an image. So you multiply 3 by a million, and that's how many dimensions an image is, really. Like, if you have the space of all possible images, it's, 3 million dimensional, right? And that's when people manipulate images, when they do computer vision, like image recognition, things like that, like, that's what they manipulate. That's what their set is. Like, we're working with images, the mathematical representation of an image is this, right? And that's just one example. There's tons of others. Even before grad school, I'd asked myself the question, what if I programmed when you program a video game, every position is 3 numbers. So 3 dimensions, like, how far along is it this way, how far along is it that way, and how far along is it that way, right? Or like the size of a box, right? And when you program a game, you're just always working with those 3 numbers. And I was just curious, what would it be like if there were 4 numbers? And I knew, because I programmed so much, that like at the very basic level, it's not that much more complicated to just add one more number, right? Like the program is already working with like this collection, so just adding one more to the collection isn't that big of a deal. So yeah, I had that question, and it's almost like it was almost a joke, because there's this programming question when you interview for jobs, which is like find the intersection between 2 rectangles, and when you write that code, just changing one number actually changes the dimension. So it was just like so trivially easy that it was funny at that moment, and I just kept that in the back of my mind. And after I was done with grad school and I had, worked, I guess, a little bit in industry, I wanted to make an innovative game, and I looked at my list of ideas for innovative games, and I think that was pretty much at the top as far as coolness.
Had any other ideas on your list been made in the meantime? What are some ideas you've had that you then got beaten to?
Oh, so many ideas. So the idea of working with a character that's projected onto a 2-dimensional surface, right? The character is just a 2-dimensional character, but it lives like on, if it lives on a wall, then if the wall starts to curve, then it will keep walking on the wall as if it was flat, but really it's just being projected onto that wall. So that definitely happened. I wanted to make Ocean's 11 the game because I thought that would be awesome, and someone kind of made that. I don't know. It could be made even better, but yeah.
So your idea is assigning 4 numbers to everything.
Yeah.
But that seems quite simple. What's the problem? Why have a million people not done that already?
That's a good question. I mean, people have definitely thought about what that means to do that, and like what 4-dimensional space, like a space that has 4 dimensions, would look like. I think there's the problem that our universe only has 3 dimensions, and so even if the computer knows all about 4 dimensions, it doesn't know how to display it on the screen, so you have to figure out what you want to do. There's a couple different big approaches. One is you take everything that's far, you take all 4 dimensions and you project them down to 3 dimensions. Because in the end you want 3, right? So what do you do with the 4th number? You can take everything and display it no matter what the 4th number is, or you can just take a slice through the world, and that sort of means that you get rid of a lot of stuff. You only take like one particular value. And so I'm doing the second thing. I'm just sort of getting rid of everything that is not close to you, basically. It starts very simple, right? It starts like, it's just add one more number. But then some things scale linearly, right? You just add one more number, it's fine. But some things are more exponential. So for example, rotations are, they get more complicated, but exponentially more complicated the more dimensions you have. And so, you have to figure out what the math of all of that is, and some of it I found in relatively recent theories in mathematics that talk about that. I think there's a lot of, when you do math, there's sort of this idea that you want it to generalize to any number of dimensions. That's sort of a beautiful thing, that if you can achieve that, then your theory is more beautiful, and then, you start to go into the aesthetics of mathematics, but it's also just about like how general is it? Like how can you apply it to many different things?
What do you mean by a rotation, for example?
you have a bunch of points and you want to know where they will be after you apply this rotation, and the rotation is defined.
So in a nutshell, like, what do you mean? Like, if it was 3 dimensions, I'd have to do X, but in a 4-dimensional game, you really up the ante. Is that what you mean? Or?
Yeah, like, well, there's more kinds of rotation in 4D. There's more ways to rotate something, right? In 3D, you've got, well, there's all the combinations, but you've got, like, you rotate in sort of this plane, or you rotate in that plane, or you rotate in that plane, right? And there's all the combinations of those. But in 4D, there's just more directions that you could be rotating into, so it's more complicated that way.
And the maths is really different, is that?
Yeah. It's just, it introduces more complications. And it's, for every axis that you add, you have to see how it works with all the previous ones that you had, right? So there's the number of combinations increases, right? Right. If you only have 2 and you add a third one, then it interacts with the first 2. But then when you add a fourth one, then it interacts with the first 3, right? And then that goes on like that. So it's more. Okay, so I already knew some of the math because of all the computer science I took, right? And so I knew about the idea, like I knew how to program the basic stuff. But then the question is like, well, how do you even make a game that's interesting? And my first few prototypes were not fun at all. But I guess my first approach was just, I wanted to make a game that was in a higher dimensional space, and just to prove that you could do it and that it wouldn't really be that much more difficult to play. It would just look weird and you wouldn't really fully understand what you're doing, but it wouldn't matter. That was just sort of my first approach. So it was just this character and you could fly around. There's nothing really much to do. The other part is, how do you represent the terrain, like the place that you walk on? I don't think that many people have thought about this at all, I guess, which was, the ground. How do you define what the ground is in 4D? And
why is that a difficult question?
Well, it's just, you have to generalize you have to first make up a theory of what the ground is, and then you have to generalize that. But then, just having ground isn't enough to make something interesting happen. One of the problems was, well, you have all this terrain, but it doesn't mean anything to you. It's just random, hills, right? So how do you make it so that the player is actually interacting with something that matters? And the key part here was, just like video games have been doing for a long time, instead of having like a smooth terrain, like break it up into these regions that are square or cubes, right? So like in any 2D, lots of 2D games have two-dimensional tiles, and you can, Mario had that where you just, walk on them and stuff. And then Minecraft did it in 3D where they had these big, cubic blocks that are either filled or unfilled. And so that was sort of the next step in that sequence was, okay, we'll take 4-dimensional space and split it into chunks, right? And so this way you can sort of reason about each chunk as either being there or not being there, and that just really simplifies the amount of things that you have to think about, especially if there are very few of them, which was a very big part of the design, is have very few changes in the terrain so that players have very little things to think about. I guess once I had the idea of breaking up the game into tiles, it was clear what the game was going to be. I just had this image of what the game was going to be. I just didn't know the details. I think that's one thing that was really interesting, is that I didn't really know exactly what it was going to look like, but I knew how to program it and I knew how to break it up into these tiles. And so I just sat down and made it. And at first it was really slow because I didn't know how to program it or even what it was going to look like. But then I programmed it and made it faster, and then I realized that how you even play this game, because I knew what the rules were at this point. I didn't know how they manifest themselves when you actually, are in the game and playing.
What does that look like? Is there like a little man that walks around, or is it just...
Yeah, it was a cube. It was a red cube in a field of bigger cubes that had uniform colors. That's it. That was all it was.
So your hero at the stage is a little red cube.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, you could walk around, you could jump, and I just discovered how to play the game at that point. And yeah, it went at that point. It was just very smooth. It was just okay. Let's just make this. It makes sense. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be playable for people too. I think that was interesting. It's like it's not gonna be abstract or something that people are gonna have a hard time figuring out. Like I did this thing where you can change the slice that you're taking, so like where the character is looking, basically, and that would deform the whole space. And that was already happening even in a simple way, but that was cool. Like I'd never seen that before in a game. I think that's definitely something that happens in any programming. You make it and then you get the nice feeling of like, oh, it exists, right? And yeah, so...
And then where does it go from there? At what point does it start looking pretty or having a theme or an aesthetic to it?
Also, I was looking for names for it that would have the word like maybe hidden or something. And I was looking at a bunch of different sites that had like mythology and other things like that. And one of the terms was Miegakure, and it means hide and reveal in Japanese. And it's the Japanese garden term. And that sort of inspired the aesthetic of being very quiet, very zen-like and meditative. So even though I didn't even know that I could program the game to look like that, very beautiful and like nature and things like that, then I had this image in my mind of what it would look like, and it was just about getting there at that point.
So the name dictated the look more than the look dictated...
Yeah, and the feel too. The feel of the game. Yeah.
So before that you'd found that word that you liked, it could have been anything. It could have been set on a spaceship. It could have been set in the desert.
Totally, yes. Yeah. I mean, the first prototypes, they were in space mostly. Yeah. In the void of space, and you could have been shooting lasers for all I know. I don't know. But you're making a puzzle game. I mean, at first I didn't even know it was going to be a puzzle game, right? But it was clear that if you're interacting with elements that you don't really understand, then that's already a puzzle, right? And if you want to make sure that the player understands what they're manipulating, then you want to put situations where that's what they have to do, right? Whereas you could make a game where you're just using the four-dimensional things, but you don't really understand why you're using them or how, then people are not going to understand, right? So just the idea of making a puzzle game changed the feel too.
You've been with it for 5 years now. What's your relationship like with this game?
Well, it's definitely a game that surprised me in how rich the idea was. When I started, I didn't think that it was going to be that fun to work on, or that there was going to be so many interesting things about it. So it's definitely felt like I was making a different game almost at multiple stages across the development. And I also moved my ambitions every time, right? Like when I realized, okay, it could be that cool, then yes, let's do that. So it hasn't been boring, and I think I don't want to even have the thought that I might get bored of it. I just want to make it and be happy. I think, as long as I'm enjoying the day-to-day and I'm enjoying working on it, it's fine. Yeah. But after 5 years, I'm like, okay, well, you kind of have to finish it now. It's starting to be a long time. Not for me, but for the world almost,
Is there are there many people following it and like asking you about it? Does that start to happen?
Yes, yeah. I mean, people have been patient generally, and I think every time I show some new awesome things, then people are like, okay, yeah, it made sense that you spent that long. Like, it's okay. But yeah, if it was the same game that it was 5 years ago, that would not go well.
You talk about how as it evolves, you think of new cool things and you add like a new cool thing to the game.
Yeah.
At what point do you draw a line and say, no more cool stuff? No matter what idea I have, this is it. No more coolness.
I think in general, I've been, setting the line pretty clearly now. But it's just because there were some things that were obviously this needs to happen. Now it's more like, okay, it would be really cool if I had that. Maybe I'll try doing it. If it takes too long, then I won't do it. But yeah, there were just some really obvious things that just needed to happen. So that was sort of the breaking point, right?
How big's the code now? How big's the monster?
I do not count. I'm sorry. It's my own engine. Nobody's done 4D in that way before, so I kind of had to.
Is that a big deal, the fact it's your own engine? Like, is that the biggest part of it, or is that just a little add-on?
No, it's big, right? Like, in general, people try to use other people's engines, and so that you are not reinventing the wheel every time, and you can focus on the innovative things. But here, the innovative things are part of the core programming, so you can't separate them. You had to do it from scratch, and not that many people do that.
Would you do anything differently? Is there like a big mistake you've made? And if you could go back 5 years and talk to 5 years ago, Marc, and say, dude, just there's one bit of advice I really want to give you.
I guess I wasted 3 weeks to a month on some programming that didn't really need to happen. But you're always learning, It's fine. I guess, yeah. I mean, a month sounds a lot, like when it's just one person. So, but it's okay. It's like learning about programming is just as important as making the game. I feel like you just, you can't just be too focused on the end product. You also have to be just, you have to be good at your craft, and that's part of life too, right?
Releasing it. Like, I mean, obviously, a lot of people have seen films like Indie Game, which sort of made, the release day this kind of this huge day in the life of a game.
Yeah.
And like, you're going to have that day eventually. Does that loom over guys like you now? Is this like a thing you fear, or is this a thing you?
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, people are gonna find all the things that you haven't found yet, and they're going to break your game probably, and you're going to have to be there and support all that. And just also, if you made a mistake, now you can't go back, right? Like right now, I can have lots of people play the game, and if something's wrong, then I can fix it. But later, it's like, I mean, I can fix it for the new people, but you've already spent your capital of most people who are going to discover it, right? So, yeah.
When I bring that up, like it was noticeable the way it affected you. Like it doesn't like there's no sparkle to your eyes, or I can't wait to release it. It looked like doom.
Of course, it's going to be great that a lot of people are going to play it, but you just see the how hard it's going to be to finish something, right?
And how will you judge success? Does it have to make a lot of money for you to be successful?
Not necessarily a lot of money, but it'd be nice if a lot of people play it. Just sort of trying to change how people think about games and see what they can do. And yeah, so that would be nice. It would be nice if you can see the effect on the games industry after the game is out.
At what point is it appropriate, or is it already appropriate to think about your next project? Like, how does that work? Is that a dangerous thing to do, or are you already doing it?
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking a little bit about what the next project would be, but I have some urges to start on stuff and like actually make it exist, but I'm resisting them in order to, focus my energy. But also it's just very hard to find something that is as interesting to work on. So that's good, I guess, so that I'm not too tempted to start something that I'm even more excited about.
Where do you go for help, and who helps do what?
Right, so I do all the programming and design, and someone else is doing the 3D modeling and animation, and then a couple of people are doing sound and things like that. So it's mostly me. I sort of direct the project, but I can't do every single thing.
What does a typical day look like for you then?
So I usually just, work all day on programming, but then I have to eventually communicate with the rest of the team and figure out where they are at. Like I get some new art, I have to check out if it looks good, like what changes need to happen. Especially how does it work with the fourth dimension? That's like new constraints, yeah. So mostly.
Do you have to have a work discipline? Like, do you sleep until midday and then have Pop-Tarts and work till midnight, or do you keep some kind of regime?
I try to just do whatever makes me happy. That's my thing. And I never had a problem sitting down on a computer and just typing away, especially when you're in the middle of something. Every indie game developer that I met has different issues. So that has never been an issue. So if I want to sleep in, then yeah, I'll let myself do that, and then maybe work all night if I feel like it. And yeah.